I wanted to say hello and welcome to everyone, and thank you so much for attending this event. We hope it will be educational and enlightening. I'd like to remind everyone to please silence your cell phones during the presentation. I'm Jean Ditzler. I'm not an activist or a public speaker. I live and work out of my home in this neighborhood a few streets away. I have 2 children that attend Fall River Elementary, and depending on how things go this year, I hope will one day attend this school, Trail Ridge Middle School. I'd like to begin by thanking the volunteer citizens involved in Longmont Roar. Longmont Roar is a nonpartisan group of concerned citizens coming from all over Longmont and from its neighboring rural areas. We assert our rights to protect the public health, safety, and well-being of our community. We want to prevent the wasteful destruction of our environment, preserve our economic vitality and our home values, and conserve Longmont's waters, minerals, parks, wildlife, open space, and recreational areas for future generations. I'd like to thank our presenters who took time on their weekends to educate us, and our citizen guests who are sharing their personal experience with us, as well as the Sierra Club for their sponsorship. And I'd also like to thank our videographers. Please, as you listen to the presentations tonight, write any questions on the index cards you have and pass them outward to the edges of your seating area, and someone will come around to pick them up. If you need another card, you come up with more than one question, just raise your hand and wait, and someone will bring one around to you. At the end of the presentations, we'll get to as many questions as possible. If we don't get to them today, we're going to have the questions and answers on the website so that everyone can access them, and your question will definitely get answered. So I personally heard about the fracking issue in October last year, and I began a lot of personal research. I learned about the proposed multi-plad well sites out here by the school, and also at Sandstone Ranch in Union Reservoir, and the Ryder 1 well site next to this school, which was contaminated for might be as long as 30 years with benzene. I learned that the well operator, top operating, didn't have a fence around the well for 2 years after this school was built, and put one up because children were climbing on the equipment. I learned that there were several other contaminated wells nearby. I combed the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, or COGCC's, website for information. Colorado deems oil and gas extraction to be of state interest, and they empower the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to regulate it. I learned that the regulations allow drilling pretty much anywhere as long as it's 350 feet from an occupied building. That means next to homes, schools, churches, daycares, and in parks, cemeteries, golf courses, airports, and waterways. I learned that the COGCC is understaffed and overwhelmed, capable of only inspecting wells every 3 to 4 years, and that inspections weren't as thorough as what I would have expected them to be. I also read the assertions from the oil and gas industry that fracking is safe, that oil and gas exploration creates jobs and reduces our dependence on foreign sources of energy, that natural gas is a clean source of energy. Alongside that, I read personal testimonies and news stories of how fracking was causing people and animals to get sick, poisoning water supplies with methane and benzene, causing explosions, causing smog in rural areas, and was one of the main contributors of methane release into our atmosphere, and was permanently taking water out of the water supply and burying it deep into the ground. I read how we produce enough natural gas in the United States that we will now be exporting it, never to be used by U.S. citizens. I read that studies are showing natural gas's exploration's overall impact to be dirtier than coal. I read that portions of the fracking process are exempt from federal oversight through the Clean Air and Water Acts and Safe Drinking Water Act. The more I read, the more shocked I became, and a question kept going through my mind. How is it possible that they can do this next to a school, next to a home, next to a water source? For me, the defining moment answering the question of, is this safe, was when I found publicly owned gas companies in their own reports to the SAC have to reveal the following about the normal operations of their company. The company's operations are subject to the usual hazards incident to the drilling and production of oil and natural gas, such as blowouts, cratering, explosions, uncontrollable flows of oil, natural gas, or well fluids, fires, pollution, releases of toxic gas, and other environmental hazards and risks. These hazards can cause personal injury and loss of life, severe damage to and destruction of property and equipment, pollution, or environmental damage, and suspension of operations. The companies that insist their processes are safe in their PR communications to the public have to be truthful with shareholders that in fact their operations are not safe. After I decided that I didn't think that fracking belonged near my home and school, I spoke to a neighbor who was involved in a like-minded group who wanted to do something about it. That group eventually became Longmont Roar. That group and other community members spoke at City Council on December 20th last year and urged them to declare a 6-month moratorium on oil and gas drilling so that we could stop Top operating from getting the permit to drill in our neighborhood, by Union Reservoir and at Sandstone Ranch, and figure out what needed to be done to ensure our safety. The City Council instead declared a 120-day moratorium to review the city's planning and zoning regulations in regard to oil and gas drilling. These draft regulations were presented to City Council last week. At that meeting and at the urging of community members who asked for a 6-month extension, the Council instead decided to extend it an additional 60 days. It was clear that the regulations weren't ready for approval. There were too many questions raised every step of the way, and public input was short and limited. So, will the new revised regulations be enough to protect us? It seems that it's likely they won't, but there are a lot of unanswered questions, and time seems to be speeding by with fracking at the end of the timeline. The COGCC is pushing back aggressively, as well as the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, who have said almost every recommended regulation in the new regulations are preempted by state law and therefore not allowed. So what can we do? Join Longmont Roar, who is working on all fronts, including community awareness, municipal government, county government, state government, and the COGCC. Spread the word through events, churches, your HOAs, petitions, and election platforms. Effect change in the regulations, enact moratoriums, explore Longmont's home rule status, and the possibility of a ban. Align with other cities and counties along the Front Range who are similarly concerned about this issue. But all that takes time. We are rapidly getting attention and gaining momentum, but time is needed to make change happen before the drill bits penetrate the ground. Join us in attending the City Council meeting on February 28th and speak up for extending the moratorium for a full 6 months. Keep drilling away from Union Reservoir, Sandstone, and our schools as long as possible. If you are unable to attend, and even if you do attend, please sign the petition at longmontroar.org. It sends an email to your City Council members that lets them know that you're concerned about this issue. Also, there's sign-up sheets in the entryway if you want to get on our email list, and we'll keep you informed of any upcoming happenings. So, that being said, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Shane Davis. He's the chairman of the Poudre Canyon group of the, I never know how to pronounce that word, of the Rocky Mountain Chapter Sierra Club, and serves as the group's conservation chair. He serves as an at-large member of the chapter executive committee and as the information and research manager for the chapter energy committee.
Should we move that? Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. All right, let's take the lights down. What a great crowd. Thanks for coming out. This is probably one of the most important things that we're facing in our generation, if not our lifetime. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on a journey through the hydraulic fracturing, the impacts in Colorado from what I've researched and some of which what you already know, but we can get started. We've got a gentleman up in the booth who's going to be running my slides, so we're ready. All right, to just preface this, I'm speaking on behalf of Sierra Club. The source of all of the Colorado oil and gas related information was derived from the COGCC's website. It's public information, and all subsequent documentation per API, per well, is actually found on the state's website. All COGCC data is unredacted and uninterpreted, thus remaining true in its original form, and can be found on the state's website unless otherwise noted. Data compilation was conducted from 2011 to present. Okay, types of observed and recorded oil and gas development impacts in Colorado, not to disclude many others, but here are a few that I'm going to be covering. Soil contamination, ground and surface water contaminations, the impacts, drinking water impacts, aquifer impacts, and well water impacts, vegetation impacts, wildlife habitat, agricultural, air quality degradation, human impacts, and also mechanical failures. What you see here is a state map of Colorado. These are the oil and gas basins that are designated by the COGCC and I believe the USGS. The areas in blue are actual oil and gas basins, so these are your targets. Here's Boulder County, and you can see just the eastern, almost 40% or a little bit more, is actually a target for oil and gas. It's in the greater Wattenberg area, so it's very ripe for drilling. This is data from the COGCC. This is data 10, October 7th of last year. It shows the actual number of wells that are active per county. I live in Weld County, or Well County. There's 17,388 at that time. Now there's closer to 18,000 that are active. Garfield County follows in second with a little bit over 9,000 at this time, followed by Yuma, La Plata, Las Almas, Rio Blanco, and 36 other counties. So there are a total of 41 counties that I know of that are being fracked at this time. This is a density well map, mainly of Weld County, a little bit of Boulder County, and then the northwest portion is Larimer County. Each dot represents an active oil and gas well pad that can have up to 52 active oil and gas wells per well pad. So you're looking at roughly 18,000 oil and gas wells right here. And I live in the middle of this red stuff, right in here somewhere. This is what a township looks like. You can see the density sort of close up and proximity to each other. Each one of these townships is just riddled with oil and gas wells. Now I would like to say that in the state of Colorado, there are 129,073 wells of all statuses, but only around 47,000 of those are active. This is another map of Weld County showing the influx or the introduction. It appears to show an introduction into Larimer County. All the yellow areas here are indicative. They're designed or designated as oil and gas exploratory units. So Larimer County is a little bit nervous right now because they can see what's just east of them. This is not really a scientific modeling map, but it's a prediction map that illustrates 100,000 wells in Colorado. The industry states, and we've heard secondary talk that Colorado may have within the next 2 or 3 decades 100,000 active oil and gas wells. So anything that was a low formation, and Wes Wilson talks about this at great length, is a target for oil and gas, with the exception of the mountains, of course. This is the greater Wattenberg field. In this area, they're actually targeting the J Sands area, so they're going to be drilling down to about 7,000, 8,000 feet. You may have seen this just recently. This was right across from this Chevrolet shop on Highway 119. This was a ruptured wellhead. This is what it should say, actually. The press called it Colorado 119 reopens east of Longmont after gas leak near Longview Estates. But we think in reality it appears that it was a ruptured wellhead which closed Highway 19 and businesses were evacuated. Just a little difference in opinion there. This is Longmont. You can see the greater Wattenberg area as delineated with the black line around it. So you're right in here. And again, this is the really, really ripe area for oil and gas development. Just sort of a close-up of your sections. And you can see the sections are roughly estimated to be, I believe it's net worth of $1 billion per section. Wes Wilson talks about this as well. So when you look at the actual county assessment for Longmont, it's around $10 billion. The value of oil and gas is roughly 3 times that, or close to that. So there's a big interest to develop. I'm sure a lot of you have seen these. These are the derricks. I'm just going to take you through some real quick basics and then jump into some other things. The derrick obviously is this vertical structure. It's usually about 150 feet up in the air. That's where they insert the piping down into the ground, the subsurface, to target that formation. And normally the round containers would hold chemicals, but I will elaborate on that in a second. This is a satellite image of a well pad just north of where I live, Firestone. This is in Weld County. These red and blue containers are actually water storage containers. They're about 50 feet long each, and we counted them. There are 165 of them on this pad. They each hold roughly 20,000 gallons of water. Mind you, it's normally municipal or fresh water. So this frac job would consist of roughly 3.3 million gallons of water used. This just gives you kind of a ground level view of these water storage tanks. This is in Firestone, right next to Coleridge Middle School, and then a King Soopers is right behind here. There are some wellheads here that are being protected by these cement barriers until they can build a fence in, but you can see a derrick off in the background as well. These are the trucks that force the waters and the chemicals and the proppants at extremely high pressures down into the ground to sort of refracture that shale formation to open it up so it can release the natural gas and or the oil, whatever their target mineral is. It's kind of a very complex system. Just a simple schematic of a completed area where you're going to see a number of wellheads that are back here. But I'll go through this real quickly. These things right here, a lot of people confuse these as water tanks for agriculture and a lot of other things. These are for oil and gas. It's a condensate tank. They do hold product. It's called a tank battery. Normally there's more than one, so it's a battery of tanks. And then you can see just off the top of that, there's a line going down. It goes down into a produced water tank, and that's where the produced water is actually stored until it's retrieved by trucks to then dispose of. Got a separator here. This actually heats up the product, removes sort of the lighter liquids from the actual product. There's an actuator valve on here that releases roughly 6 cubic feet per minute of hydrocarbon vapors or methane. What this does is it controls the system. When you initially frack, you have unstable pressures, and those hiccups in the system are being released through that actuator. And according to Encana just a few days ago, the release actuator valve is 6 cubic feet per minute, and on a new well that can happen roughly every 5 minutes, 24 hours a day. And then it slowly declines as the actual well regains and stabilizes its pressure. A lot of the hydrocarbon vapors are then burned off in volatile organic combustor stacks. Here's a small one, it's very common, but you see the larger ones. Those are usually indicative of a number of wellheads on site. So they're going to have more of a VOC quantity to burn off. Inside here is a pilot light to contain the flame. If the flame were out in the open, it'd be extremely hazardous. As you'll see by all the dozen signs around here, no open flame. What this does is it burns off excess hydrocarbon vapors. And so on a cool day, you might see a heat signature coming from this VOC stack, but there are a couple of them here. This right here in the blue, this is a berm. A berm is there to protect any type of fluid loss within this pad area from migrating elsewhere. Normally it's supposed to hold 110 to 150% of the actual fluid loss that would be on site. This is in Firestone, and you can see the close proximity to residential homes here. This one mapped out at roughly 118 feet from the neighbor's back sliding glass door. Again, this is a condensate tank. It holds roughly 16,000 gallons of product, and then the produced water tank goes down in the bottom here. What I found is this area in Firestone was zoned industrial first, and then somehow the city approved residential dwelling development in close proximity to these wells. You know, the state has certain setbacks, COGCC, if they're going to drill a well next to a home in an urban area, it's usually 350 feet away from the residence. But in this case, it was in reverse, as I understand it. The well was drilled first, and then the homes were developed later, so I urge all of you to really talk to your city to see what type of mitigations and what type of more responsible setbacks could be had when you're creating residential areas in and amongst oil and gas development that already exists. This is a sort of a multi-well pad. It's an aggregation. The industry purports that it's more efficient and more effective for them. It is. I have pros and cons with this because the pros of this is that you're not taking, for example, there are 7 or 8, there are actually 8 well bores on this site, as I can see. Instead of clearing out 8 football field sections and drilling as you would conventionally with vertical drilling all over the place, now they can maximize them and put them on a single pad. So you're not going to have that scarring of the land all over the place. You have one concentrated area. The con with this is that you have an aggregation of pollution. You have, per condensate tank, per Encana, 2 tons of volatile organic hydrocarbon vapors are released from each tank battery every year, to include your 6 CFM from the separators and to also include your volatile organic combustor stacks. So I think it should be considered a major source pollution rather than a minor source pollution. This is another area that needs to be stressed very heavily. So we've got 2 tons of hydrocarbon vapors being released from the condensate tanks. Obviously, it's simple math. That's 16 tons of hydrocarbon vapors per year from this pad. Just imagine if you were living downstream a little bit. Fugitive emissions, what are they? They include hydrocarbon gases released from leaks and from evaporation of volatile organic compounds from open pits. VOCs such as benzene, ethylbenzene, cyclopentane, and dozens of others are released chemicals. They do pose a long-term health risk to workers and local communities. And keep in mind, you live in a city. If they're going to frack in the city, do know that the industry is exempt from the Clean Air Act. If methane emissions are contained in a building, obviously there is a risk of explosion, and I have a case that shows an example of that in a little bit here. This is a video of hydrocarbon vapors that are being released. Joe, it's actually right here. Go ahead and just click on the video itself, right there. This is from a helicopter. It's taken from Barnett Shale. You can see the tank batteries here. This is viewing it from an infrared camera. You can see the hydrocarbon vapor and signature heat release as well. Okay, those are hydrocarbon vapors that are being released from the condensate tanks, as I mentioned. They happen everywhere. Everywhere there is a condensate tank. According to CANA, again, that roughly 2 tons of hydrocarbon vapors are released annually per tank. This is a study done by NOAA that was just recently compiled. I believe it was a week or 2 ago. This was done in Erie, Colorado, just down the road. They have about 19,000 people, population. And what they did was, NOAA has a tower there, an air quality or air chemistry monitoring tower there, and they juxtaposed the propane levels with Pasadena, California, and Houston, Texas. And you can see right here in this top yellow arrow that the black is Erie. The red is Houston, Texas, and the green is Pasadena, California. So the propane levels, parts per billion, according to NOAA, are significantly elevated above those 2 comparative cities, directly linked from oil and gas development, per NOAA. The second one down here is the ethane. This, again, was juxtaposed or paralleled with Pasadena, California, and Houston, Texas, and it shows the parts per billion that are identical to both Houston, Texas, and Pasadena, California. Once again, NOAA indicates that these are directly related to oil and gas development. Fugitive emissions, again, I mean, this is really important because they're exempt from the Clean Air Act, and these happen everywhere. This is a children's playground in the background. This is in Firestone, Colorado. You can see the VOC stacks, the volatile organic combustor flares. Again, the flame is contained on the inside, so you're not going to see the flame shooting at the top. They are in close proximity to our public access areas where our children play. Here's a satellite image of the same area. The prior image I showed you is right here. Here's the playground. Here's an active oil and gas production area. Here's the elementary school. And here's another oil and gas well. So they're kind of sandwiched in between oil and gas, this elementary school and this playground. This one is not really surprising, but I think it is. Historically, this image was taken in 1999. It's a satellite image, and I want to bring to your attention this text right here. This is Thomas Reservoir right here. This is in Erie, Colorado. And then, of course, these are the streets. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fast forward in time. This is 1999. And you can see residential development around this once active oil and gas location, this well right here. It's listed as plugged and abandoned during this residential development. Now you can see this homeowner, may or may not know, I don't know, it's in great proximity, close proximity to the residents. I bring this up for a number of reasons. One, do you understand that there are a number of abandoned oil and gas wells in your city, in almost every city? Is the city aware of them? I recently gave a presentation in another city and they were shocked. They didn't know. And so they're kind of scrambling to try to figure out what they can do. So my advice again is that your city should locate these and not allow residential development in close proximity to these abandoned wells. It's very important not to. And then this is 2011, so you can see that this is still here. The reason why I bring that up is because this is a case January 13th, 2011 in Florence, Colorado. The Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission requested emergency funding for explosive levels of methane seeping into occupied residential homes from plugged and abandoned wells. You can see the location is right here. This is in Florence. You can see on this map over here, all the orange dots appear to be abandoned oil and gas wells. So there are a number of homes, as I understand it, in the reports that I've read, that are being affected by this. So that's my concern. All cities, so far that I've seen, have a number of abandoned wells. There are roughly 90,000 abandoned wells in the entire state. The question is, where are they? Produced water. Produced water, everybody hears about this, but what is it really? It's the water that is produced during the fracking operations. It's classified as an industrial waste. It's exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act. It's industrial waste that contains highly toxic or carcinogenic or even radioactive materials, normally occurring radioactive materials, to include benzene, xylene, toluene, ethylbenzene, naturally occurring radioactive materials, and other chemicals. This is the produced water tank, as I mentioned. It's roughly 3,000 gallons. It's flowed off of the condensate tank, and then trucks will come in and pump it out, and then take it to a Class 2 injection well. Class 2 injection well, I'll show you in a little bit. Basically, it's a disposal area that's designed for this water. The water that's used, and Mr. Doe is going to be talking about that, is used to extinction. This water cannot be reused for municipal purposes, so they have to take this water, this produced water, to a disposal site, usually somewhere, and deep well inject it forever. It's never returned back to the hydrological cycle again. This is a recent study that I did. It was reviewed just 2 days ago, and there'll be some more information on this. Basically what it is I studied 1,000 spill release reports done and operated by the COGCC in regards to oil and gas. So 1,000 oil and gas spills I studied, and what I concluded was that 42.7% of those appear to result in groundwater contamination. That's documented. That's a Form 19. It's a spill release report that the COGCC mandates that the operators fill out once there's a surface spill. So 42.7% appear to result in groundwater contamination out of the 1,000 spill reports. This is in Weld County. 3.1% appear to result in surface water contamination, and 57.1% of those spills appear to have berm failures. Remember, the berm is designed to prevent the secondary migration of these lost fluids on site. So here's an example of a spill. This is in Arapahoe County in December 2005, I believe. This is one that really shocked me when I saw it for a number of reasons. One is that this is an open evaporation pit in Arapahoe County. And they had a spill release report that they filled out, and they had lost 210,000 gallons of produced water. Apparently the berm breached, and 210,000 gallons of this industrial waste drained into Cottonwood Creek, right down here. 0 of those 210,000 gallons were recovered. Who are the recipients of Cottonwood Creek? Maybe it's dry, but it does receive snow melts and stormwater runoff as well. So that's one concern too, is that there are a lot of spills that most of the fluids or partial fluids are just never recovered again. Here's another spill. This is an oil spill. This is in Weld County again. This is actually at a disposal facility site for oil and gas. 2,100 gallons were spilled. 421 of those gallons, or 420 gallons, was not recovered. So you have 421 gallons of this benzene product that has not been recovered. And the groundwater was 3 to 4 feet in depth. So here they are here. On the report, it states that the spill was contained within a berm, but to me it looks like they grabbed some shovels real quickly and just made a berm around the spill. And that's exactly what they did. Good for them. I'm glad they did it. It's a little late though. All right, so this is something that was very curious to me as well. This is a satellite image in Weld County indicating a number of well pad sites which appear to me show vegetation loss in certain areas or any type of degradation of the surface vegetation. To me, that would be indicative of a surface spill with any type of chemicals that would essentially void the vegetation or kill it. Now, I did some research on this. Noble Energy operates these areas, and I did some deep research to find out if they had any spill release reports associated with these precise locations. There are none. One of the other questions is, with the 90,000 historic wells, are they a problem? And how could they be a problem? This is in Weld County. This is Mr. Anderson, the case of Mr. Anderson's water well in the Laramie Fox Hills Aquifer. August 1st, 2009, Mr. Anderson filed a complaint with the state alleging an impact to his water well was caused from mining or any of the pipes that were underground. He wasn't sure, so he actually called the investigator, the inspectors, to come out and check it out. The state tested Mr. Anderson's water and found it had been impacted from mining operation with thermogenic methane and toluene, highly carcinogenic. The state issued a notice of alleged violation to the oil and gas operator. It was determined that the well bore had a hole in the production casing. The state determined that the oil and gas operator caused contamination of the Laramie Fox Hills Aquifer and Mr. Anderson's water well from the hole, thus contaminating groundwater. These reports can be found on the COGCC's website. The order number is 1V as in Victor, -349. The state issued fines of $66,000, later reduced to $46,200. The oil and gas well was then immediately plugged and abandoned by the oil and gas operator. Here's Mr. Anderson's residence right here, and roughly 1,000 feet was the oil and gas operation. So you can see 1,000 feet of possible migration. It's quite a ways. This is from my buddy Phil right up here in the front. What is the real cost of water? He said this at one of our presentations, and I quickly jotted it down. He says, "I'm simply amazed that we are using our most precious natural resource, water, to mine for something far less valuable." Couldn't be farther from the truth. Where does all the potentially toxic produced water go? As I mentioned, Class 2 injection wells. These are large open formations underground that the oil and gas industry pumps produced water or industrial fracking wastewater down into where it remains forever. Waste injection site has been found in Colorado to have the capacity of roughly 1.3 trillion gallons. That's a lot of industrial waste liquid. Rumors say they can pump it into streams, rivers, lakes, and open bodies of water. Generally, that's probably from coal bed methane extraction. The water is much, much cleaner. Not as many chemicals that are being used in that extraction. Some of the other areas that we are told by people who work in the industry for 20 or 30 years that they can use it for agriculture, crops, and livestock. Or recently spraying on dirt roads or out in the fields for dust mitigation. Keep in mind, there are some great operators. There are some great ones that have great ethics, great morals, but then you have the other side as well. And I'll show you. My suspicion was when I was speaking to an operator that worked out in the field, stating that if they didn't have to get a permit, they just didn't. They would just dump the produced water on the surface. That caught my attention immediately, and so I started doing a little bit of investigation. These areas are active oil and gas well pads, and you can see a void of vegetation that goes out into the field. I did show these images to a person that worked in the industry for 20 or 30 years, And he stated that that looks exactly like what would happen when they open up the valves in the produced water trucks and just drive. Here are a couple others that I found. Close proximity to a riparian area or an active body of water or seasonally active body of water. You can see in the red these sterile areas where there is no vegetation. Again, this is in Weld County, just north of Keensburg, about 5 miles. Here's a couple others which are shocking. It's a well pad here, and it's just quite easy to drive out in the field with your valves open. Not saying they did it, I can't prove it. However, it appears that this would be the case. And this area speaks for itself. It's kind of a mess. Lots of void of vegetation, big striations where vegetation is completely lost. And here are the active oil and gas well sites. Okay, so the other impact is revegetation or reclamation. What's being done? I'm seeing that there's a huge trend, at least in the past, that you're going to see all these well pad sites. Again, this is in Weld County, just right next door to you. And I just put some circles around most of them so you can see where these areas are. A lot of these are not active, they're plugged and abandoned. So the reclamation, the remediation appears to not have been successful. Here's just another satellite image. You can see the green ones are actually active oil and gas wells. The red ones are not active. So you can see these areas where they're void of vegetation. They need to revegetate that the way it was prior to drilling or better. That's what the industry should do. I'm almost done here. I've got a couple more slides. Abandoned oil and gas wells, how many are there, and are they at risk? As I mentioned earlier, there are 47,000 approximately that are active oil and gas wells. There are 129,073 in the entire state. 47,000 approximately are active, and that leaves roughly 90,000 that are abandoned historic wells, and many of those are awaiting re-entry. My concerns are many, but one is these historic wells date back 20, 30 years. The natural integrity of the cement has been compromised throughout time and previous operations. Now they're coming in with new technologies and extreme high pressures. Is there a liability using a 30 or 40-year-old cement wellbore? I think so. One of the biggest impacts, I think, is it's a human error by the COGCC. They only have 17 inspectors in the entire state. Last year they had 15. Now they have 17. So you have 47,000 active oil and gas wells and 90,000 inactive. How many of those are each inspector going to inspect? So let's just look at the 47,000 right here. That equals 2,760 well inspections per year per inspector for the active ones, the 47,000. Now the inactive ones have to be inspected once per year. So that would equate to 5,294 inspections per inspector for just the abandoned wells. Now we add those up, and we have 8,058 inspections for each one of those 17 inspectors per year. It's physically impossible. Physically impossible. They just can't do it. So to me, that's a huge liability on the state to not be able to mitigate spills and any other types of adverse environmental and human health impacts. Is this a failure? I think we can all conclude that it probably is. And that's the end of my slideshow, and I'll introduce Wes Wilson.
Well, thanks, Shane. You're getting better each time. My name is Wes Wilson. I had worked 37 years for the Environmental Protection Agency. In 2004, I was the whistleblower on EPA's first fracking report. EPA then had made an illogical conclusion. They said fracking constitutes the introduction of toxic fluids, yet it posed no risk. It was an absurd conclusion. I'll just fill you in on the immediate history that followed there. There was an investigation of my complaint by the Inspector General of EPA, but the following summer, Congress exempted the practice of hydraulic fracking from the Safe Drinking Water Act. Therefore, there was no more need to investigate. Okay, next, first slide. The industry has gone through a fundamental change here. They've got this incredible technology that consists of high volume hydraulic fracking combined with horizontal wells. And they're no longer after trapped underground sources. When, look at the top here where it says conventional gas. Think of a trap, sort of a hill underground. Much of the original production of oil and gas was as a result of these traps. And I think you can see right away that you could only produce a successful well if you drilled a vertical well into the trap. But if you're off a little bit, you hit a dry well. That's fundamentally changed in this business. They're now after, look at the blue-gray, the unconventional shale gas, and particularly that represents the Niobrara here. But they're after the mother lode. They're after the oil and gas in the rock where it formed. In the ancient seabed here, all of Colorado was under the sea in Cretaceous time, and the critters that lived in the sea died off. There was very little oxygen. So they just got other sediments formed on top of them. And this one formation that's about 8,000 feet deep, the Niobrara, holds such critters. And it's here in the Wattenberg area, it's been cooked enough to be highly productive. But unfortunately, the industry is after this formation throughout the state. You saw the basins that Shane showed in that one map. Every one of those basins contains this potential to produce oil. I think all of you might realize that natural gas production has kind of slipped down in the western states. It's because this same technology has been used in Pennsylvania and Ohio. This vast Marcellus drilling has produced a lot of natural gas closer to the Boston, New York market and made natural gas in the West not as highly valued. And that could have resulted in less drilling in Colorado. But what the industry has done with this combination of high volume and horizontal drilling is makes these mother lode like the Niobrara possible. So it's unlikely a well will be dry. They're not looking for these traps. They're going to where the oil hasn't left the rock. Next slide. Here's a map of the Niobrara in the northeast part of Colorado. You see all of Boulder County. And so with an industry that has armed itself from the state legislature the right to drill anywhere, as long as they're 350 feet from a residence, it is likely that we will see drilling in the city of Boulder. There certainly is the resource. In this last 18 months, there's been 8,100 private leases picked up by major corporations for this Niobrara drilling. Next slide. I'm going to take you through 7 or 8 myths. The industry is constantly feeding us. I mean, there's lots of advertising. There's a lot of money put into their campaign to try to convince us this industry is safe. And the number one thing they always tout is fracking is 60 years old and safe and proven. There is some methods of fracking that date back that long, but they have not been using this horizontal drilling combined with high volume. We simply lack the science to know if that technology is safe. Next slide. As Shane just made it abundantly clear, we know that there are bad wells and spills. The industry is willing to talk about these problems. Especially spills of undiluted fluids are going to be a problem. Leaking pits. You know, the industry has a practice of putting in these pits and not doing it sound. They can leak. And as Shane pointed out, there's a lot of mismanagement of the fracking fluids, such as just taking them out in the field. Next slide. The other part of this industry that EPA is now studying is just whether we have systemic risks. Always have risk. We know for certain that we have this air pathway risk. The volatile organic compounds and the hazardous air products that come off them come off every well. We don't know that first topic up there, that whether good wells create a problem. We don't have scientific studies yet to show whether the overlying geology is adequate to cause a good seal. And let me make a particular point here about the Niobrara. The previous drilling into the D sands and J sands below it meant that all the other wells went through the Niobrara. So now the future drilling will be close to previously abandoned wells that went right through that same formation, creating the potential pathway to come to the surface. Next slide. We've even been told what turns out to be a myth, that natural gas produced this way, and a lot of this will produce about 30% natural gas off the Niobrara, that the natural gas itself is a good bridge fuel. It'll get us to a future with renewable energies. Unfortunately, we now know from scientific studies that the amount of leaking methane from this industry more than offsets its advantage to coal. The second bullet here, the same NOAA study that Shane just mentioned about the high propane as high as Pasadena, the same NOAA study found that the Weld County well fields leak 4% of the gas they produce. So natural gas is going to warm the planet. Next slide. The industry would like us to believe that fluid migration is rare. Now, the few studies we have show it's not rare. The Canadian researchers were showing that about 12% of new wells had some type of leakage. EPA, I'm sure you've seen the national news, EPA found a significant problem in Pavilion, Wyoming from this practice. And one of the COGC reports I looked at showed that 36% of the gas wells had problems of leaking gas at the surface. Next slide. I'm in the movie Gasland. Josh Fox produced this award-winning movie. How many of you might have seen Gasland? Oh, quite a few. Gasland 2 is supposed to come out in June. Well, one thing that happened was the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission actually put out a document that says we're correcting Gasland. But in that very document that they produced, they confirmed two important components of the movie. The state confirmed that Amy Ellsworth's well did have thermogenic gas. She released a settlement agreement. Typical for those settlement agreements, they have non-disclosure clauses, so the public never knows what happened. Also in Garfield County, there was thermogenic gas coming to the surface. Next slide. The state's claims, based on their data, that there's not groundwater contamination. Starting back in 2008, the state was getting both voluntary and required testing of domestic wells nearby. But the problem with domestic wells is they're not very suited as a scientific means of testing the groundwater. And then if there is a problem, neither the state or the industry determines the cause. I mean, you can't blame the industry going out and investigate to try to say they didn't create the cause. But often the state fails to identify any cause of contamination. And then, as I said, if the industry is at fault, there's not a remedy other than just paying off the polluted landowner. Next slide. One myth is that from the industry now is that fracking will use very little water. But Phil Doe and I have put together some numbers based on their little information that we can see in insider documents, that each of these horizontal wells is going to use 5 million gallons. That's 15 acre-feet. Each well could be refracked. And so if we're looking at some 100,000 wells, this industry could use more water than the city of Denver. And this water goes to extinction. As Shane made clear, the water that comes back might get retreated and go to another well, but eventually any water that they have left over gets disposed of into a deep well. Next slide. You realize the state legislature has made it a state priority to recover oil and gas. And in doing so, they have preempted a county like Boulder, all counties, and cities from aggressively regulating this industry. Now, there is room within this case law. The case law is a little bit unsettled. But there is room for counties to do additional regulation, certainly in the areas of monitoring and other aspects, noise or aesthetics. And I put some examples on here. But the case law stands for the fact that if a city or county is making a new rule, as long as it doesn't materially be different and can be made in harmony with the state rules. So you can see that's a narrow window. Setback distance is maybe not one of them. That is, the state may object to a county trying to establish a larger setback distance. Some communities have current land use code that prevents drilling within residential areas. I know that's true in Commerce City. Do you know if Longmont current code allows drilling within residential areas? Anyone? I'm not aware if they do. A community could try to obligate cleanup to pre-existing conditions. One of these exemptions that Shane mentioned was this is an industry that is exempt from our hazardous liability laws. You know, if you owned this school and some previous owner had allowed oil to be spilled here, you as the current owner are responsible. You can't say the prior owner did it. But the oil and gas industry can. The oil and gas drilling fields are exempt from liability under the Comprehensive Environmental Liability Act. Communities could require a closed loop. I think this case is probably coming to a closure right now because of Longmont and other communities are non-attainment for ozone. You're unlikely to see these open pits as they have in the past. And future drilling are likely to require these closed loops. Next slide. The final thing I want to hit just briefly is the myth that cities or counties could not stop drilling. Now, this is a controversial arena, but it's a view of many that there is an opportunity under Colorado Home Rule communities that they should have this authority under your state constitution to govern, to decide what comes into the community. And I just do a brief reference here to a similar case out of the Supreme Court. Note that Pittsburgh has done one of these community-based initiatives that preclude future drilling within their city. Another example is the New York State Assembly has agreed to stop all drilling within the watershed of the city of New York. So I'll leave you with there. I'm sure you're going to have many questions, and I'll turn it over to our last speaker. Thank you.
My name is Phil Doe. I work for the Bureau of Reclamation. I was in charge of their water policy staff for a number of years. I just want to talk about water. The earth is 70% of the earth is covered with water. So what's the big deal? Well, the problem is that only about 3% of it is available to you and me for drinking and raising crops and the very essence of life itself. And of that 3%, less than 1% is really truly available. Most of it's captured in the glaciers of Antarctica and Greenland. So less than 1% of the water of the earth is available to us for drinking and survival. This is apparently hasn't created a sense of urgency among our state representatives and our state government, our federal government, because we're squandering it on something that's less valuable, and that's oil production. Both Wes and Shane alluded to the fact that in fracking, horizontal fracking, it probably takes 5 million gallons for each well to frack it. And in each well pad, our studies indicate that there could be 8 wells per pad. The pad is about 10 acres. And at 5 million, you're talking about 40 million gallons of water. That's enough water for the domestic needs of 1,200 people for a year. And we're looking at 100,000 wells potential in the state. How do we know this? Well, we can back into it a number of ways. While you were having your dinner the other day, the oil and gas industry came into this state and leased 6 million acres of public land. 5 million of it federal, 1 million of it state. That's a land mass larger than Massachusetts and larger than 4 other states. You were undoubtedly unaware of that. We have no idea how much land, private land, has been leased by the oil and gas industry because this state, which brags constantly about how good its records are and how perfect they are in every way, has no clue as how much private land has been leased to the oil and gas industry. But we could reasonably conclude that it might be twice what the federal and state land is combined. So we could already be looking at 18 million acres of land that's been leased to the oil and gas industry. 18 million acres. That's about 15% of the total land mass of this state. We have about 109,000 square miles, I think, in this state. It's a massive industrialization of this state, and we have not done one study. We've not examined how much water it will take to undertake this industrialization. We have done none of these things. We've not analyzed the impact on public health. We've not analyzed the impact on fish and wildlife. We haven't analyzed the impact on our rivers, which are most important to me. You know, W.H. Auden, the English poet, said that thousands of people have lived without love, but nobody has lived without water. You know, apparently, this doesn't inspire our politicians, but it should. I mean, there are exceptions. Matt tried to, you know, had a good bill down there the other day, and it was just, you know, they dumped all over it, trying to give some local control to people. But my point is this, and I'll be very brief about this. We don't know what the impacts of this are, but they are gigantic by any way you look at them. Any magnifying glass you put on this industrialization makes it gigantic. You don't even have to magnify it. It is simply gigantic. I mean, we can reasonably look at the future and see where we might be using enough water through fracking that equals what Denver uses annually, which is about 260,000 acre-feet. Think about that. But the magnificent difference is that when we use it, when you use it in Longmont, or when you use it in Greeley or Boulder, 50% of it gets back into the system. We don't use it all. You know, it's flushed down the toilet, gets back into the system eventually. But when these guys use it, it is gone forever. It is 100% use. They use it to extinction. And what they can't use, what they corrupt so deeply that it can't be used again, they bury 2 miles underground in the hopes that it'll never come to the surface again. I mean, this is a form of idiocy. But nobody is saying anything. You have to say something. We don't have this water. All of our rivers are over-appropriated. We're destroying the Colorado River system by pumping water over the divide over here. I mean, the Fraser River, as many of you probably know, is, you know, close to extinction. We've taken 70% of its water and brought it over here. And that we would bring it over here to use it to frack, I think, is almost sinful. We just don't have the water. It's over-appropriated. You and I are paying huge fines to the state of Kansas because we stole water from Kansas. We're paying huge costs because we stole water from the Rio Grande. We had to build a closed basin project for that purpose, just so we could meet the water requirements by compact we owe other states. So to add another use on top of what we don't have, you know, it's really impossible. What we're talking about here is a physical impossibility, unless we want to dry up our farms, which is a possibility. That's what happens in the Owen Valley. I mean, they came in and bought out the farmers. But we should have a right to make those decisions. There should be a very large public discussion about, is this what we want to do with our most valuable resource? And it does belong to us. Make no mistake about that. The Constitution, black letter law, the streams of this state are public property. We have not been asked, nor have we given our consent to this use of our water. We simply have not done it, and it would be my impression from the people I talk to that we wouldn't allow them to do it if we were given the chance to vote on this. So with that, I'll just leave you with these very, very challenging problems we confront. But our water is precious to us, and we can't make any more of that. There are other ways to make oil and gas. And quite frankly, they don't need to use water to frack with. There are other mediums, but they're more expensive, and they can get the water now because it's a perfect storm. All these cities are broke. If they can sell water to the oil and gas industry, they're going to do it, unless we stop them. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for coming out. Quite a crowd. My name is Chris Porzuchek. I live here in Longmont. I have a couple properties here in Longmont, and I run a business here. I live on the western shores of Union Reservoir, and I found out about this oil and gas industry coming into our city about 4 months ago. Some of the city council had come and sat us down, as well as Top Operating, which is the company that is ultimately going to be applying and holds many leases in the city of Longmont. They sat us down and explained a lot of what you're hearing. Well, not the whole story, I can assure you of that, but their intentions of coming in here and doing some of the drilling around Union Reservoir. And so it piqued my interest back in October, November, to find out a lot more about what is this industry. They want to put a consolidated pad of 16 wells, 350 feet from our house and as close as 50 feet to our property lines. Now I've got a family and we invite our friends over, and so what scared me about this is the fact that they can put 16 wells consolidated 350 feet from our house and 50 feet from our property lines. It just didn't seem prudent and safe for my family if we were to be playing in the backyard, and they rolled up here with a drill rig. So I started doing my research, and what I started finding was pretty disturbing, that just in this particular area, I just started researching the wells that are right around here, and what we found was the Ryder well. I'm sure many people have heard about the Ryder well. A brief understanding of what happened there. When they drilled this well back in 1986, they used what's called the open pit, which means they pull out the tailings and they throw it in the pit to evaporate. Well, apparently they didn't line this back in 1986 right here next to the school, and so it contaminated into our groundwater. The COGCC did have this on record in 1986. They chose not to do anything about it and rather just let it dilute into our water. There's a problem with that. So 10 years later, 10 years went by, nobody did anything, and what happened is the developer that built the homes around here also owned that surface and found the contamination. He wanted to develop it, and he realized that there's a contamination. Well, I can't build if there's a contamination there. So he went back and forth for several years with the COGCC, as well as the managing operator, which is Top Operating, about this well. And this was back in 2006. Excuse me, this was a full, 1996. They were going back and forth to try and get it remediated for several years. Nothing actually took place for another 10 years. So this is 1986. There was another complaint in 1996. Nothing got done. Another complaint in 2006. Nothing got done, which is why there is still contamination 100 times the allowable limit on this well right over here. They did order, the COGCC that is, did order a cleanup on this particular well. It didn't get cleaned up because we were still seeing contamination as much as 100 times even after they had cleaned it up. So what I started concluding was that the COGCC was not very effective, and that they seemed more like a trade rep for the oil and gas industry as opposed to a commission that was actually serve and protect the public and protect our children from being able to play on this. One of the other issues that I found out I had a big problem with was the fact that they didn't bother telling anybody about this contamination. That's why we are standing with this school 300 feet away from a contaminated well site. They said, well, the school was built there after. Well, that's because nobody knew anything about this, and they tried to keep it as quiet as possible and buy off the seller of the property so they can move on and not have to remediate this. We do have some action. As of January of this year, they did find that the contamination has gone down, but ultimately it's just because it's diluted into our water. Nothing has really been done to remove the soil. It's just been diluted, and every time it rains, those levels seem to go up. So that got me interested in this industry and what I can learn about it, and most of what I'm finding is it's pretty disturbing. They're not doing a whole bunch of follow-up, and that's why we're all standing here today. We also do have another well at Union Reservoir called the Stamp Well, and that is also showing contamination into our groundwater, into Union Reservoir, and that is as recent as February 6th of 2012. So there's some real flaws with this system that we're trying to hold them accountable, and that's why we need your help, and that's why we're trying to educate everybody here that we need to start holding these people accountable. Thank you for your time.
Hi everybody, my name's Rod Brewski. I live down on East County Line Road just south of here, and my family at this particular time is being fracked. There's a 5-well consolidated pad going in about 600 feet away from our family's home. When we bought our property about a year ago, we weren't real aware that they were going to do such a elaborate fracking campaign in our area. And before I get started, I just wanted to say I really want to thank any of the local elected officials that showed up today. And if you guys want to show your hands, any of the city council members, there's Mayor Coombs. Thank you, Mayor, for being here today. Matt Jones, our state representative, is here. We have a hopeful elected, if we can get him on the ballot, Rich Lopez is here today, and I want to thank these people because they're the ones that can make a difference for us. But a little bit back to my family story, and we didn't realize, this was going to go on with us, and it's really affected our family. We are going from 5 to 6 oil and gas wells in our neighborhood within a mile radius of our house. We're going to be, once they're done with their play, and I think that's really a silly word they use, play, I think about my 5-year-old son. We're going to have 30 oil and gas wells around our house. And as you can see from Shane's presentation of the off-gassing of these neurotoxins and stuff, we're in a low-lying area, and the state of Colorado doesn't require any kind of air monitoring for these people. I guess my family's a casualty of the failure of the state of Colorado to protect its citizens. This is a civil rights problem. So, they say the counties and the local municipalities don't have the right. What are we colonized is what it seems like the Indian Trading Company did to the colonies of our founders of our country. They were under this same rule that, no, you can't make up your mind what's good for you locally, and this is ridiculous. So I really encourage the local city council and the mayor to extend this moratorium as long as we can, because I think you're going to more research comes out, they're going to find out just how dangerous this is. The one thing that I find is really ironic and very sad, and I addressed this at a city council meeting several months ago, and I invite anybody today to follow any of A&W water trucks. They're these big silver tankers, and they're pulling water out of your water supply today, and they're heading down this very day. Today, Phil and Wes came down to my house. We were there for about an hour, and how many trucks did we count coming into the drill site? About 15 of these tanker trucks that carry about, I don't know how many thousands of gallons of water to be fracked into, just being taken off the face of our earth, and this is water that belongs to you, the citizens of Longmont, and they keep selling this water to A&W Water, Ensign. For what? Is it worth a briefcase of cash to take away our natural resources and pollute the planet and help my family be a casualty to this terrible, terrible thing? We need to look at this a little closer. I know we all need natural gas and stuff, and I don't want to come off like an environmental activist. I just want to be known as a common sense activist and somebody that, believes in democracy. I went down and I went and testified at the State House for Matt Jones's bill. It is a farce to see these state representatives keep tweeting and looking at their emails once they listened to the people that were against this bill. They didn't pay attention to the people that were testifying. That is just a direct violation of our civil rights, and I recommend that people write letters to our senators and the state representatives that they need to listen to us. I don't care if they don't agree with us, but it shows you how broken our democracy is here in this state of Colorado. And we need to get together and get a unified voice. We need to get a handle on this. The Colorado Oil and Gas Administration here, the CCOG, has caused a jailbreak on our state. They have not looked at this. They can't regulate it. They told me on a phone conversation, yeah, there's been a lot of inquiries about this, and this is the CCOG. We can only hope the oil and gas operators do the right thing because they can't even get a handle on it. And this is a state agency. They're just giving out permits to harm us. They're not regulating it. Thanks a lot, everybody. I really appreciate the turnout today.
Hi, I'm Jen Palazzolo. I am here from Erie, and first I want to commend all of you for coming out today. This is probably the biggest crowd I've been in front of, and I think it's wonderful that Longmont has the opportunity to be proactive on this. In Erie, we're kind of being a bit reactive, as Shane pointed out with the NOAA report from our tower. We have hundreds of wells in Erie. We have many homes built on top of wells, and so we're just coming on the second end of it. And I kind of just want to spin off on what Rob was saying about a unified voice. I think I've been involved with this for about 2 months now. And I think the biggest thing for me that I can't lose sight of is we all want to change where we live. And that, of course, is going to be the immediate focus because you want to protect your home, you want to protect your children. But small change has to be grouped together to make a big change, because changing something in Erie or Longmont or Boulder is only part of the problem. And I think if everyone can help spread awareness and education and give people the opportunity to come to their own conclusion. For me, once I started reading and gathering information and going to all these different presentations, my mind just couldn't sit at ease with it. And so I continued to talk to other people, and I stay involved with all the groups, not just Erie, because I really believe in the big picture we have to change things at a state level. And Rod's absolutely right. I presented at a different bill, and they listen to the industry, and they completely disrespect the citizens who put them into office. And it was really upsetting. But the opposite side was when we went to the House, you had a different level of respect. They listened to both sides. Luckily, we were pretty much the only side at that bill, and they did give us respect, and they did listen. And I think that this is a symptom of a big problem in our country. This could be applied to many different industries. And so I think if we can all work together to change this as a whole in the state, don't give them so many exemptions. Take some control back in our local towns. We can affect change in a big way. And I think we have to realize we're all on the same side. Everybody's going to be in a different place in this journey. Some people, this might be your first time hearing, so it's going to be overwhelming. Somebody like Rod, who's in the midst of it, it's very emotional. And so if we can all just find a way to work together amongst our different communities, I really believe we can affect change in a really big way. And that was just kind of the message I wanted to put out here, being an outsider of Longmont, coming from Erie, that, I support you. I've met amazing people through this process, and I really believe we can all come together and make this a safe place to be again. Thank you.
This event was put on by a very small group of volunteers, and we put our own money into this facility and all the materials that you have. So if anyone feels the overwhelming desire to help out a little bit, there's some donation bins out there, and we would really appreciate it. And I think that's all I needed to say, so I'd like you to welcome Matt Jones.
So, can you guys hear me back there? I'm not very loud. It's one of my better traits, actually. And I'm sorry, I didn't know there'd be this many people. I wore my leisure wear in here, and I'm underdressed, I feel. But in any case, let me tell you a little bit about what happened to the bill I ran, and also about the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission and your local control, because they fit together. And I want you, there's going to be a takeaway at the end of this for you. Number one, thanks very much for everybody who came down on the bill I ran, the local control giving local governments more control over oil and gas drilling. Also helping kill another bill in the Senate, and then the closed loop and the setback bills, although those scheduling was in such a way that people didn't have a chance to get out very much, I'm afraid. We didn't, I worked the heck out of that bill. I talked to all the members on the committee, and in the end it came down to, and I worked across the aisle. I just believe in doing that. You know, we're there to solve problems and not fight. So in the end it was a party line vote that killed that bill. But because everybody showed up and we were too big for a small room that was downstairs, they had to move us up to the biggest room available, which is the old Supreme Court chambers. And that sent a message. People are getting it. People are getting that regular people are unhappy about what's going on, about this issue. And the fact that it's a little bit different issue now, it's not just horizontal drilling. When they go in and drill, they're doing a number of holes at the same time, and it's become an industrial activity, essentially out of people's back doors. People are starting to get that, and I think we need to keep pushing the ball up the hill on that. But let me tell you about drafting the bill. I've been on a big learning curve with this issue. And when I first thought about doing this issue, I thought, well, I'm just going to list the things local governments should be able to do. That makes sense, right? When I talked to the local government, people like the Colorado Municipal League and Colorado Counties, Inc., and also some attorneys that have done work in this, they said, don't do that. It will imply that we don't have that authority, and we do. So what the bill that came out was broad, if you will, and it's just a couple paragraphs. But what it did is it shifted more control to local governments, and the oil and gas lobbyists proved that with their testimony. They didn't like it at all because they thought the case law would go away. But the reason that's a bad thing to list those is those categories of things are not necessarily precluded. Let me explain to you how it works. A local government under local land use authority can promulgate rules, and then the operator, the oil and gas operator, if they don't like them, has to come into court and say, no, they're wrong, and they're in operational conflict with the state rules. I want you to think about that. Local governments have kind of the first place in line, and people have to challenge that court. And it's an evidentiary hearing. This sounds fancy, like I'm an attorney, and I'm not. But there's an evidentiary hearing on the facts in that case. They're very specific. And everything else is not decided. For instance, the Voss decision up in Greeley said you cannot preclude drilling, but they left open doing other things like zoning. And that applied to a vertical drilling rig, not a horizontal one. So theoretically, you could have a drilling rig farther away and then go sideways underneath. So the fact circumstances have changed. So the bill died. I'm not done. We're not done. But that's a destructive piece of this. So there's not going to be any help from the legislature, and I apologize for the behavior of some of the people on that committee. I don't control their behavior, and it's too bad that they did what they did. The other thing is, okay, how about the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission? Can't they help us out? That makes some sense. But I want you to think about it. You saw the number of people that do inspections. I'm on the Ag, Livestock, and Natural Resource Committee. It's code for the Environment Committee. And we fought over giving more inspectors this year that the industry wanted. That's how bad it is, okay? The other thing is, it's great they're doing a stakeholder process for setbacks. I want you to think about this a minute. A setback in an urban area is 350 feet. In a rural area, it's 150 feet. If somebody were to put a medical marijuana dispensary in from a school, it's 1,000 feet. If you were going to put a liquor store in, a new one, it has to be 500 feet from the boundary of the school. So that's about 400 feet out here. So that's like 1,000 feet. So that perspective is all off. And I bring up that example to show you, they're not going to, it's great they're doing a stakeholder process, That's like saying we're forming a committee to study this. So you're not going to get any help because there is a well 800 feet out here that could be drilled at any time. So that gets to the last thing. That's your local government. Now remember how this works. It's very specific. These cases you're hearing about, the Attorney General's memo on this said these whole categories were preempted. That's not true. It's very specific. So the thing that's going to help Longmont at this point is local government officials, elected officials, doing more. That's the short answer. And I would suggest now's the time you have the opportunity, kind of seize the day and be aggressive about it, because you have the inside track as a municipality. And that's your solution to what's going to happen in the near future. I understand that people are going to ask for a longer moratorium. Moratoriums are one of those case law things that came up, and local governments can do a moratorium. So they should be able to extend it. And that's what my understanding is people are going to ask you to do. But be involved like you are today. Keep at it. I'm going to keep at it. We all got to keep at this thing because it's a big issue, and there's a lot of vested interest. It's interesting when I do a lot of work in renewable energy issues, and the point was made that there's $7 billion worth of new wind energy, which is actually the cheapest form of energy these days, that have been invested in Colorado in the last dozen years. Just this year alone, $10 billion has come into local drilling companies. So that's the scale of it. So we got to keep pushing this along. But in the meantime, the solution for you guys is to work with your local governments, encourage them to be strong on this issue, potentially be taken to court, be like La Plata County was 20 years ago. Be like La Plata County down in Durango was 20 years ago, who set this whole thing up. So thanks for all you're doing. Thanks for coming out on a Sunday. We're going to keep working at this, and together we can make a difference on this thing, and I'm going to keep pushing for my end.
I know we're way over on time, but we are going to have a question and answer session for anyone who wants to hang around. And like I said before, if your question isn't answered, please check on our website, and we will try to get to all of them. But I know that this could kind of go on, so I just want to thank everyone for attending and all of our wonderful speakers. And it's so great to see such a great turnout. We would love to see you on Tuesday at the City Council to ask to extend the moratorium 6 months. And if you can't get there, please do go on to our website and sign the petition and email your City Council members that this is important to all of us. And I'll turn it over to Shane, who's going to take question and answer. Thank you.
Is this mic on? Yeah, we're on. Okay, good. We have roughly 90 to 100 questions. We would be here probably until sunset or beyond. So what I'm going to do is it's just natural. There are a number of duplicate questions. I'll find those. I'll pull those out. In the meantime, I'm going to give Wes and Phil a number of questions while I'm trying to filter through these. There's some fantastic questions and some extremely unique questions and very important ones also. I'll actually read the question for these guys. They can figure out who wants to answer it. It says, please be specific. Illustrate how these fracking chemicals affect the function of human organisms and their potential human effect or adverse human impact.
I'll try.
We're not toxicologists, but he'll try.
Right, I'm an engineer and not a toxicologist. I think the world's expert on here, amazingly, is right here in Colorado. Her name is Dr. Theo Colburn. She's put out a number of publications on the health impacts of these chemicals. She was able to get chemical information from firemen and other sources And she has a whole host of potential health effects if you're exposed to them. They include endocrine disruptors, where the chemical at very small concentrations can affect the emerging embryo in the human womb. The biggest issue for us is just to understand that pathway of how these chemicals, if they're used at the well, get to our bodies. And the primary one, according to the health impact assessment done by CSU, is this air pathway. Particularly if the compounds used in fracking come back to the surface and then either are allowed to evaporate or escape through the condensate tanks, then it's a good chance that if you're nearby, you'll be inhaling those. Now, those are the hazardous air pollutants that are not monitored by the state. And Rod, you could tell that great story about the woman coming out and using her nose.
Well, I can tell you, muddling through our bureaucracy in the state of Colorado, of course, doing the best I can to protect my family. After they drill the well, the state has the Department of Health and Human Resources, I do believe is the department. And they're the ones that monitor all the condensate tanks. And again, this is one of those numbers that Shane brought up. They have 6 inspectors for the whole state of Colorado.
17.
Oh, but this department has 6.
Right.
Okay, of this particular source at the state of Colorado. So they're getting ready to frack the well, which they're doing today, and they have been for the last few days because there's a 5-pad well. They were doing some work on the condensate tank that was close to my house, and I was smelling some fumes, and of course, doing my research and stuff. This has been a crash course for me. I called, and I could smell something strange because they're working on this condensate tank, and they're the ones that regulate this after the wells are done. And this lady came racing up in her car from the state of Colorado, steps out of her car, and goes, "I don't smell anything." And don't laugh about this because she does have a certified nose. Our tax dollars are going to pay for her to have her nose recertified every year. And she goes, "Well, if I smelled something, what I would have to do," and she goes, "Please don't laugh, I have to put a funnel over my nose with these carbon filters and triangulate if I suspect this is the condensate tank that's creating these fumes. And then I can write them a citation." It's basically a parking ticket. Now, the other thing that I discovered from having this conversation with her is Shane was showing those supersized burners. The gas and oil companies pay about $500 a year to do that, and they're able to dump a couple more tons of the VOCs into the air for a very small fee. So it's basically like going to McDonald's and supersizing your fries and stuff, that for a little bit of money, they can pollute a lot more. And that's where my concern comes for my family. There's no air pollution standards on these people, and, here we are. I guess my family is going to be the guinea pig. We're a big question mark. What's going to happen in the long term? And I would like to see some of these people making these laws look at my families in the face, that when we have, or if, I hope it doesn't happen, these health problems, and this is what I keep hearing from all these state government agencies. There's nothing we can do. And I want them to look my family in the eye and tell them that there was nothing we can do. Let's hope that Longmont takes the initiative to at least say, we tried, and if you failed, but at least we tried. That's what I want to see. I don't want to see what is happening to my family happen to anybody else. This is wrong.
I just wanted to say that just because the government isn't measuring what comes off these stacks doesn't mean they aren't harmful. I mean, this is kind of Alfred E. Newman science. Because we don't know anything, it can't possibly be bad. We have to change that prescription and say we want to know, and then we'll decide if it's bad or not. But, I think we can all guess what the outcome would be.
Okay, we'll try to go through these really quickly here. Question, can the city of Longmont refuse to sell water to fracking operations?
Right now, they just recently, I think a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, signed a 20-year contract with A&W. So they would be in violation of that contract for the next 18 years if they broke that contract. So as of right now, there is, without violating that contract, the answer is no.
Okay. If drilling occurs within the city limits, why is it exempt from Clean Air Act? It always has been since 2005. Doesn't matter where it is. It's exempt from the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, the Superfund Act, the Restoration Act, and a few others.
EPA is making some attempt to correct this gap right now. Last November, EPA announced it would require green completions on all these fracking events. Now that'll be like a little Band-Aid, but if this rule goes through, some 40% of the volatile organic compounds will not be released from these active fracking wells.
Wes Wilson said, privately water wells are poorly suited for studies to show contamination has occurred. Why is this? Could you elaborate on the well contamination testing processes and what legal recourse is there?
There was a very interesting case in the Raton Basin down there, Walsenburg, that makes this case. A man named Tracy Dahl had a well contaminated that he thought was due to nearby COVID methane fracking. And the state came in and looked at that and concluded that the sediment in his well and the trihalomethanes that they found in chemistry analysis was due to him. They claimed it was due to him shock chlorinating his well in order to get rid of some iron bacteria. So homeowners do some maintenance on their well. Worse, for us scientists, domestic wells aren't often just screened in one aquifer. So to do testing in groundwater, we need the type of monitoring wells EPA drilled up in Pavilion, where they're dedicated to that purpose and just screened on the aquifer we're testing.
How and where is produced water disposed of? As in my slideshow, I showed you Class 2 injection wells. They're considered sort of this repository or deposit location underground, thousands of feet underground, to inject industrial fracking liquid waste. Essentially, these could be 10,000 feet, 12,000 feet below the ground. How is it brought there and injected? On site, you're going to have those produced water tanks, like I mentioned. The tanker trucks will come to the produced water tanks and suck all that produced water out and haul it off to these Class 2 injections. Mind you, there are roughly 693 liquid waste injection sites in the state of Colorado. Each one, I think, would be considered a Superfund site if they were not exempt, but they're exempt.
I'd just like to elaborate a little bit. One of the regulations that the city has proposed in the last couple of weeks is to ban these injection wells. And what we found was pushback from the COGCC and in the industry coming to our city councils and our planning and zoning and telling us, no, we have to be allowed to, we must allow injection wells per the COGCC code. We cannot ban them, which we don't believe that these have any place in any city or urban area.
Question, since oil and gas has been exempted from the Clean Air and Clean Water Act, what could be done if we could prove that produced water was being released on the land? That was part of my study, was analyzing 1,000 spill release reports. These are official reports. Look for something to be released tomorrow. I've had another organization in mine, Sierra Club, working on this for over a year, and it's going to be released tomorrow. So you'll see just how bad or how prevalent groundwater contaminations are in regards to oil and gas development. But I think your question is really great because it's in the same path as my mission is when we produce this data, it's the COGCC's data, it's their own data, we don't alter it. Could we then show liability that they failed to prevent or mitigate adverse environmental and human health impacts? I think so. What could you do? Could you sue them? We don't know. So there are a lot of possibilities. This is a good one. I think we can both elaborate. Are ceramic pellets considered a potential degree of danger, I guess, or green component of fracking fluid? I think it's a bifurcated question. Obviously, they're coded.
The way this process works is every fracking recipe includes sand or a ceramic component. And after the high pressure opens the rock, this proppant, this either ceramic or sand, holds a little fracture open so the gas or oil can flow back to the well. Sometimes these, especially ceramic ones, are given a light radioactive coating so that the industry can tell how far and how effective their frac jobs are. And if that's the case, it's likely, based on what Wyoming's doing, that such radioactive components will be held in proprietary, that is, they'll be kept secret. You know, Colorado passed a rule to require fracking chemicals to be disclosed. That's starting in April. But chemicals like that, that's considered a trade secret, won't be released.
How far underground can fracking wells go horizontally? And also, can they go underneath homes?
Well, I mean, the data on this is all over the place. And I think it's because it's so new and the industry reserves the right to drill as far as they need to get the most production. We've been told in Alaska the horizontals went up to 6 miles. I know for a fact in the Bakken, according to state records, they're going up to 2 miles. I mean, in North Dakota, they're going in, but most of the time they don't. In Colorado, it's still undetermined. They're claiming they're using about 2.5 million gallons per frac. And the information we have from Pennsylvania is it takes about 1 million gallons per 1,000 feet. So it looks like they may, on average, be going a half a mile. But I think our figures about the water use per section, is pretty good. I think you can look at about 40 million gallons per section.
And yes, they do drill into your homes. They can. That's part of the lease agreement. They can horizontally drill under your area. I believe that was the case last year in Windsor, Colorado. Big uproar. The HOA was there. The HOA appeared to be a little interested because they were receiving partial royalties on that, and the community, the homeowners, were very resistant. But yes, they can drill right underneath your home. Granted, it's thousands of feet. It's still under your home.
Let me just follow up on what Matt said, though. One of the pivotal cases where Greeley tried to ban drilling back in the 80s, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the city of Greeley lost its attempt to ban. It was based on the then current facts that all wells were vertical and they were after a trap. So the current technology throws those facts out. Most future wells will have this horizontal leg, and they're going after formation that's everywhere. It's throughout the Front Range. So that does present an interesting opportunity for communities to regulate the surface facilities and preclude them from being in residential areas or within the city altogether, and still make that opportunity for the industry to drill into the city and get their resource.
The question is, why are they allowed to lease public land without a public vote? Great question.
Well, the regulations are set up if the oil and gas industry comes into the BLM, which handles all the public land in the western United States for all other agencies, including the Department of Ag, Forest Service, etc., and all the other agencies within the Department of Interior. All they have to do is express an interest in leasing that land, and it goes up on the board on a quarterly lease auction, and they can lease it for as little as $2.50 an acre. And they have control over that land for 10 years. Now with the state, it's the same process. If the oil and gas industry has interest in a piece of state land, they come into the state land board and they say, we're interested in this. It goes up for auction, and it can go up for a similar price. But they only get control for 5 years, and there's a 1-year kicker if they ask for an exception. But it takes very little. It takes very little to transfer, really, ownership of our public property over to the oil and gas industry. All they have to do is ask, and that's the end of it. We've appealed this. I'll tell you a short story. One of the reasons that Wes and I got into this initially was because they were leasing a lot of land in South Park, which is the headwaters for Denver's water supply. They'd actually leased 80,000 acres of public land in South Park, and that's where we get our water. I mean, not only there was the possibility of corrupting our water supply, but they were going to have to take our water to frack. So it was a double whammy. So we got involved in that. It's kind of slowed down. We may have scared them off, but it's hard to say. But it doesn't take much to take our land out of our dominion and give it to the oil and gas industry. $2.50 an acre if you want to know the truth.
Question, what is the rate of government subsidy for the oil and gas industry? Well, it's a death benefit, it's a cost benefit, and I think a lot of this would be part of their sacrifice in their business model. That's a little cynical, but it's a reality of things. Bill?
Well, this is one of the rare things. I mean, most nations, most Western nations, in fact, almost all of them, take the lion's share of the revenue from a natural resource that belongs to them. In this country, that's not the case. What we do is we only take, in the state of Colorado, the federal government gets 12.5% of the royalty for any oil and gas production on federal land. The states gets 16.5% generally. Private individuals sometimes get up to 25%. That's their royalty. The state of Colorado, in addition to that, gets a severance tax on all oil and gas production of 4.5%. But the problem is that our neighboring states, and some of you may have remembered this issue several years ago that the then governor is now Fort Collins tried to handle. We get 4.5%, Wyoming gets 9%, I believe Utah gets 11%. It certainly would seem possible that we could get as much as Wyoming, but we don't. We get half of what Wyoming gets. So if we were getting more, a lot of our budgetary problems might be solved. I'm not a big fan of oil and gas drilling to solve our budget problems, but we get very damn little.
Question, in the injection wells, go ahead.
Just follow. The question was about tax subsidies, and a couple things come to mind. If the industry does happen to drill a dry well, they write that off their taxes. And consider this, that if the community does some land use regulations and gets sued the way Matt was implying, any cost that the industry occurs to challenge such rules, again, is written off their tax loads, their tax obligations.
Question, in the injection wells for the disposal of produced water, what precautions are taken to prevent these hazardous liquid materials from migrating into groundwater aquifers?
The disposal of the produced water into a class well is one of the things that is regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act. So EPA has promulgated pretty stringent rules and then delegated that authority to the state of Colorado. And here's what it differs in two ways from the production wells that are fracked. When you get a well approved under this process to disposal, it has to be shown to have mechanical integrity throughout, that is, all pipes are solid, and it has to assure that any wells within a mile radius, old wells, are plugged, so that the injection just doesn't come back an old well. That is what's missing from the rules at once fracking itself was exempted from the Safe Drinking Water Act.
There's something that occurred the other day at a hearing I was at where the COGCC person said that they had an additional 600 wells, which are not Class 2 wells, that they were also injecting produced water into. We don't know anything about that, but we're going to research it. Those are not approved, to our knowledge, and we just don't know what's going on there. So it's more than the 200 Class 2 wells, which have been approved for this process. But apparently the COGCC has approved other wells that we don't really know anything about.
Here's a question I'd actually like to answer. It's how has fracking benefited Firestone and Weld County? I live in Firestone. I don't plan to live there very much longer, but I can tell you approximately that Weld County brought in $50 million in oil and gas royalty revenue last year. But they have a campaign right now stating that 1 in 4 children go hungry, so could you please donate? I guess the question I would ask is, how have all the exemptions that exist benefited the oil and gas company? I've always asked that to them, and not one of them has answered that.
Of course, the industry is going to say, you know, the large tax base and the large amount of jobs associated with this. And unfortunately, we have to face the fact that if they're successful in this Niobrara play, they could recover as much as $1 billion in each section of land, each square mile of land.
What is the status of green fracking fluids?
Halliburton officials last year were fond of going around to some national conferences and drinking a sample of their recipe that was benign. When I say if they can drink it, they can use it. but they're not using it. There's many excuses. It's slightly more expensive or less efficient. Halliburton has that product, but apparently not many buyers. And no state is now obligating green fracking fluids to be used.
This is probably for Phil, but how do we find out about any Colorado legislation underway that is, 1, enabling fracking, 2, discouraging fracking, and who is sponsoring these bills, and what legal resources being utilized to assist? I will tell you that if you go to the state chapter's Sierra Club website, which is sierraclub.org, click on Colorado, there is a number of bills that are addressing your questions and your concerns that we are tracking, and you can click on those and find out the status of those, and you can also participate in defending them or supporting them.
It's hard, you know, you can go to the legislative calendar and look, and you can separate it by committee. I think if there is a bill on fracking, it will probably be under local government. I'm only aware of one more bill, Morgan Carroll's bill, that has some really good qualities in it, but the word on the street is it won't pass. It'll probably get out of the Senate, but probably not out of the House. And that's the only one I'm aware of. There have been 4, and we defeated one that was really bad that would have given COGCC absolute control over all these issues. It looks to us like they already have them. But we lost on the one that Matt's bill, which was a pretty modest bill, really. All it said is, well, you do have some control over this industry. But there may be other bills. I mean, you know, the leadership still has a right to introduce bills after the 5 each member can introduce. So there might be other bills. And if we keep raising the pressure and elevating the issue, that's a possibility, I suppose.
We just have time for a few more questions. We have about 5 minutes left. If we could answer them quickly, that'd be great. We could probably get through 3, 4, 5. Is it true that a large percentage of the gas extracted in the United States is actually being sold to China? If that's true, what's the percentage?
Not yet. In the 1990s, there were 8 different export terminal or import terminals. Imagine in the 1990s, the U.S. thought it was going to import liquefied natural gas from Russia and Middle East countries. None of that happened, but there are now proposals to reverse those prior terminal approvals to make them have capacity for export. Ironically, the United States is exporting refined fuels, that is gasoline and jet fuel. We have an excess capacity in the United States from our refineries that are now selling. And our ability, U.S. ability to sell overseas has benefited from the low price of natural gas that's needed to make those gasoline products. So I think bottom line is this: anticipate we will become a colony, and the excess natural gas will be sold to China at some future date, because in China, the price of natural gas is 3 times what it is in the United States.
Okay, I'm going to fuse these 2 questions together. The 2 questions are, so where do we get our energy from? Solar and wind do not produce enough. The second question with that is, what are the alternatives? How do we balance our need for energy with sustainability?
I think it's absolutely clear from the science that the climate is changing. And so we know that fossil fuel burning will harm our society. The right question is, what's the least cost way to have renewables? And we have many, many options. The first of which is energy conservation. That's the most efficient capital investment. And after that, we just simply must pursue a path that will protect the climate security of this great planet. So whatever the cost of renewables is, as a society, it'll be cheaper than burning ourselves with fossil fuels.
I'd like to add on to that, if I may. What we really need to do is recognize that the industry has capitalized on the language clean energy as for natural gas as a clean bridge fuel. That vernacular for renewables and clean energy is pretty squashed by the industry over the last decade. We need to come up with something that's irrefutable. And this is for Mr. Jones. We need healthy energy, absolutely healthy energy. You can't refute that. There's only one solution, and the outcome is healthy energy.
I'd just like to add that, you know, Oil and gas is all over the state. As I said, probably at least 18 million square miles of land in the state. Regulation of that industry is not going to stop them. And regulation inside cities, if the cities so prefer not to have them there, I don't think is going to stop the oil and gas industry. And they have other means of extracting this gas other than water. They use water because it's cheapest to them, but it's dearest to us. So I think we have to insist that they use other mediums other than water when they do drill. Regulation is not a ban. Regulation is just reasonableness. And they want their regulations, and they don't want us to influence those regulations, and we have to.
We have to take this one because we love debate. Are there any representatives from the oil and gas industry here today? And if so, do they refute anything presented? It's probably scary to hold up one hand in a big crowd, but if you're here, let us know. All right, why are the fines so paltry when these companies break the rule, and how do we increase the fines? Why are they so paltry? Well, a couple things. Whenever there's a spill release and I see these Form 19s created, the COGCC will impose rule violation fines. The COGCC mandates those types of fines per rule. There are 175 pages of rules. We would have to change the state Supreme Court law as I understand it. The industry, the operators, never admit guilt. They will sign the line stating they're not guilty. They generally receive a reduced fine. So there are a couple of things we need to look at. One is to increase the fines by 100-fold, 100 times, for every single violation. And every single time an operator has a spill, if they had a previous spill in the past, it's a sliding scale. It goes up and up and up and up. Because even if they were fined like in Canada and West Divide Cricket, this $371,000 was the largest set fine in the state of Colorado. That's in their little change pocket. That is nothing to them. And how can West Divide Creek be remediated with $370,000? It can't. It's impossible. My thoughts. Thank you. We're out of time, but thank you so much for coming.
I wanted to say hello and welcome to everyone, and thank you so much for attending this event. We hope it will be educational and enlightening. I'd like to remind everyone to please silence your cell phones during the presentation. I'm Jean Ditzler. I'm not an activist or a public speaker. I live and work out of my home in this neighborhood a few streets away. I have 2 children that attend Fall River Elementary, and depending on how things go this year, I hope will one day attend this school, Trail Ridge Middle School. I'd like to begin by thanking the volunteer citizens involved in Longmont Roar. Longmont Roar is a nonpartisan group of concerned citizens coming from all over Longmont and from its neighboring rural areas. We assert our rights to protect the public health, safety, and well-being of our community. We want to prevent the wasteful destruction of our environment, preserve our economic vitality and our home values, and conserve Longmont's waters, minerals, parks, wildlife, open space, and recreational areas for future generations. I'd like to thank our presenters who took time on their weekends to educate us, and our citizen guests who are sharing their personal experience with us, as well as the Sierra Club for their sponsorship. And I'd also like to thank our videographers. Please, as you listen to the presentations tonight, write any questions on the index cards you have and pass them outward to the edges of your seating area, and someone will come around to pick them up. If you need another card, you come up with more than one question, just raise your hand and wait, and someone will bring one around to you. At the end of the presentations, we'll get to as many questions as possible. If we don't get to them today, we're going to have the questions and answers on the website so that everyone can access them, and your question will definitely get answered. So I personally heard about the fracking issue in October last year, and I began a lot of personal research. I learned about the proposed multi-plad well sites out here by the school, and also at Sandstone Ranch in Union Reservoir, and the Ryder 1 well site next to this school, which was contaminated for might be as long as 30 years with benzene. I learned that the well operator top operating didn't have a fence around the well for 2 years after this school was built, and put one up because children were climbing on the equipment. I learned that there were several other contaminated wells nearby. I combed the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, or COGCC's, website for information. Colorado deems oil and gas extraction to be of state interest, and they empower the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to regulate it. I learned that the regulations allow drilling pretty much anywhere as long as it's 350 feet from an occupied building. That means next to homes, schools, churches, daycares, and in parks, cemeteries, golf courses, airports, and waterways. I learned that the COGCC is understaffed and overwhelmed, capable of only inspecting wells every 3 to 4 years, and that inspections weren't as thorough as what I would have expected them to be. I also read the assertions from the oil and gas industry that fracking is safe, that oil and gas exploration creates jobs and reduces our dependence on foreign sources of energy, that natural gas is a clean source of energy. Alongside that, I read personal testimonies and news stories of how fracking was causing people and animals to get sick, poisoning water supplies with methane and benzene, causing explosions, causing smog in rural areas, and was one of the main contributors of methane release into our atmosphere, and was permanently taking water out of the water supply and burying it deep into the ground. I read how we produce enough natural gas in the United States that we will now be exporting it, never to be used by U.S. citizens. I read that studies are showing natural gas's exploration's overall impact to be dirtier than coal. I read that portions of the fracking process are exempt from federal oversight through the Clean Air and Water Acts and Safe Drinking Water Act. The more I read, the more shocked I became, and a question kept going through my mind. How is it possible that they can do this next to a school, next to a home, next to a water source? For me, the defining moment answering the question of, is this safe, was when I found publicly owned gas companies in their own reports to the SAC have to reveal the following about the normal operations of their company. The company's operations are subject to the usual hazards incident to the drilling and production of oil and natural gas, such as blowouts, cratering, explosions, uncontrollable flows of oil, natural gas, or well fluids.
Mechanical failures. What you see here is a state map of Colorado. These are the oil and gas basins that are designated by the COGCC and I believe the USGS. The areas in blue are actual oil and gas basins, so these are your targets. Here's Boulder County, and you can see just the eastern, almost 40% or a little bit more, is actually a target for oil and gas. It's in the greater Wattenberg area, so it's very ripe for drilling. This is data from the COGCC. This is data October 7th of last year. It shows the actual number of wells that are active per county. I live in Weld County, or Well County. There's 17,388 at that time. Now there's closer to 18,000 that are active. Garfield County follows in second with a little bit over 9,000 at this time, followed by Yuma, La Plata, Las Animas, Rio Blanco, and 36 other counties. So there are a total of 41 counties that I know of that are being fracked at this time. This is a density well map, mainly of Weld County, a little bit of Boulder County, and then the northwest portion is Larimer County. Each dot represents an active oil and gas well pad that can have up to 52 active oil and gas wells per well pad. So you're looking at roughly 18,000 oil and gas wells right here. And I live in the middle of this red stuff, right in here somewhere. This is what a township looks like. You can see the density sort of close up and proximity to each other. Each one of these townships is just riddled with oil and gas wells. Now, I would like to say that in the state of Colorado, there are 129,073 wells of all statuses, but only around 47,000 of those are active. This is another map of Weld County showing the influx or the introduction. It appears to show an introduction into Larimer County. All the yellow areas here are indicative. They're designed or designated as oil and gas exploratory units. So Larimer County is a little bit nervous right now because they can see what's just east of them. This is not really a scientific modeling map, but it's a prediction map that illustrates 100,000 wells in Colorado. The industry states, and we've heard secondary talk that Colorado may have within the next 2 or 3 decades.
The City Council meeting on February 28th and speak up for extending the moratorium for a full 6 months. Keep drilling away from Union Reservoir, sandstone, and our schools as long as possible. If you are unable to attend, and even if you do attend, please sign the petition at longmontroar.org. It sends an email to your City Council members that lets them know that you're concerned about this issue. Also, there's sign-up sheets in the entryway if you want to get on our email list, and we'll keep you informed of any upcoming happenings. So, that being said, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Shane Davis. He's the chairman of the Poudre Canyon group of the, I never know how to pronounce that word, of the Rocky Mountain Chapter Sierra Club, and serves as the group's conservation chair. He serves as an at-large member of the Chapter Executive Committee and as the Information and Research Manager for the Chapter Energy Committee.
Should we move that? Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. All right, let's take the lights down. What a great crowd. Thanks for coming out. This is probably one of the most important things that we're facing in our generation, if not our lifetime. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on a journey through the hydraulic fracturing, the impacts in Colorado from what I've researched, and some of which what you already know, but we can get started. We've got a gentleman up in the booth who's going to be running my slides, so we're ready. All right, to just preface this, I'm speaking on behalf of Sierra Club. The source of all of the Colorado oil and gas related information was derived from the COGCC's website. It's public information, and all subsequent documentation per API, per well, is actually found on the state's website. All COGCC data is unredacted and uninterpreted, thus remaining true in its original form, and can be found on the state's website unless otherwise noted. Data compilation was conducted from 2011 to present. Okay, types of observed and recorded oil and gas development impacts in Colorado, not to disclude many others, but here are a few that I'm going to be covering. Soil contamination, ground and surface water contaminations, the impacts, drinking water impacts, aquifer impacts, and well water impacts, vegetation impacts, wildlife habitat, agricultural, air quality degradation, human impacts, and also
fires, pollution, releases of toxic gas, and other environmental hazards and risks. These hazards can cause personal injury and loss of life, severe damage to and destruction of property and equipment, pollution or environmental damage, and suspension of operations. The companies that insist their processes are safe in their pre-R communications to the public have to be truthful with shareholders that in fact their operations are not safe. After I decided that I didn't think that fracking belonged near my home and school, I spoke to a neighbor who was involved in a like-minded group who wanted to do something about it. That group eventually became Longmont Roar. That group and other community members spoke at City Council on December 20th last year and urged them to declare a 6-month moratorium on oil and gas drilling so that we could stop top operating from getting the permit to drill in our neighborhood, by Union Reservoir and at Sandstone Ranch, and figure out what needed to be done to ensure our safety. The City Council instead declared a 120-day moratorium to review the city's planning and zoning regulations in regard to oil and gas drilling. These draft regulations were presented to City Council last week. At that meeting and at the urging of community members who asked for a 6-month extension, the Council instead decided to extend it an additional 60 days. It was clear that the regulations weren't ready for approval. There were too many questions raised every step of the way, and public input was short and limited. So, will the new revised regulations be enough to protect us? It seems that it's likely they won't, but there are a lot of unanswered questions, and time seems to be speeding by with fracking at the end of the timeline. The COGCC is pushing back aggressively, as well as the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, who have said almost every recommended regulation in the new regulations are preempted by state law and therefore not allowed. So what can we do? Join Longmont Roar, who is working on all fronts, including community awareness, municipal government, county government, state government, and the COGCC. Spread the word through events, churches, your HOAs, petitions, and election platforms. Effect change in the regulations, enact moratoriums, explore Longmont's home rule status, and the possibility of a ban. align with other cities and counties along the Front Range who are similarly concerned about this issue. But all that takes time. We are rapidly getting attention and gaining momentum, but time is needed to make change happen before the drill bits penetrate the ground. Join us in attending